Hello everyone, my name is Alec Janis. I am a extension educator at the University of Connecticut. I recently have began working with the Connecticut Department of Public Health to provide PFAS education and testing for homeowners across the state. Now, let me back up. PFAS, right? Maybe something you've heard about, maybe not. If you've found this video, it's quite possible you are intentionally looking to learn more a little about PFAS, and hopefully throughout this 30-minute presentation, I can give you a better understanding of what PFAS is. So, if you look in this slide, you'll see the chemical name spelled out of what PFAS stands for: pair and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Now, throughout the rest of this presentation, I will only be referring to these as PFAS. PFAS is all you really need to know. They are also called forever chemicals because of their, chemical makeup, making them nearly impossible to get rid of. That is not to say that they are impossible to destroy at incredibly high temperatures. It is quite possible to begin breaking down the bonds that are so strong in these chemicals. However, naturally, normal sunlight, bacteria, any type of natural process to normally break down things, these are much less effective at breaking down these chemicals. But in a lab setting, it is totally possible. So, well, for right now, all you need to know is PFAS and forever chemicals. So, I'm going to dive into the history of these chemicals and then bring everyone up to speed about where we're at currently with our research, what we know, who may be at risk, who may be being exposed, and if you are being exposed, what are the possible health effects. After that, we'll talk a little bit about wells, since this project is mostly focused on rural well owners in Connecticut, and how PFAS may be getting into their wells. Then we'll talk a little bit about the legislation, any of the laws, both on a federal or a state level, that have come out recently. And finally, we'll talk about our testing process. So let's dive into the history. So back in the 30s, refrigerators are becoming the modern household appliance that we know today. Now, these refrigerators were not as effective as they could be. So at a certain point, DuPont, which is a major chemical manufacturing company, takes on the mantle and says, we're going to make the refrigerators more efficient, more effective, less dangerous, etc. And they begin working on chemical formulas to create, proper cooling systems. And in these experiments, a chemical is created. And this chemical is an accident. It was not intended to be created. However, a fine white powder falls out of one of the tubes that a scientist is running an experiment on, and it should have been a gas. Now, the white powder is strange, and like any scientist, this person says, all right, let me do a little more digging and see what properties it has. He finds out that it does not dissolve in water. He cannot burn it with fire. It's not breaking down in acid or an acidic compound. And it seems strange. It seems, all right, nearly indestructible as of right now. Doesn't spend too much time on it. Tells his supervisors, and they say, excellent, good to know, let's put it on the shelf. And so 10, 20 years go by, and World War II is on the horizon. The United States is getting more involved, and throughout a lot of their military projects, they are using corrosive chemicals, and pipes are frequently breaking down and making the manufacturing process of the chemicals and the chemical weapons they're making inefficient. And so word gets to DuPont, and DuPont says, oh, we could help you fix your pipes and maybe make this process more efficient. What they design are a plastic that is infused with these PFAS chemicals, and they create pipe fittings and pipe liners, pipe inserts, all these things that shield the metal pipe from corroding while staying entirely durable. They're chemical resistant, they're heat resistant, they're water resistant. These chemicals that they created seem to be a magic, wonder drug, for lack of a better word. And after the war, DuPont says, all right, well, this was a great product, but we could have so many more applications of this. How else could we use it? And so it then begins to move into the commercial space. It's being used on irons. It's being used in kitchen cookware. It's being used in spatulas, things like that. It's being sprayed onto rugs, being sprayed onto furniture. All these things that come in contact with either wet substances or foods, for instances, anything that may have like an oil, something that may stain a carpet or a rug. All of these things are being treated with these PFAS compounds because of their oil and water resistant properties. Now, at this time, sometime in the 50s, it is the same time as when the US government decides they're going to start putting fluoride into the water system. Now, when putting fluoride or putting any type of chemical into a public water system, people are going to get upset. They don't know what it is, they don't know why it's being done, information is not being communicated properly, etc. And so the government says, we're going to try to right our wrongs, and we will test the water and test people's blood to make sure that the fluoride that people are drinking is not ending up in their blood or causing any type of health effects. Now, as they begin this testing, they find that there is no organic form of fluoride that are in people's blood. However, there is a different inorganic form of fluoride. Now, when I say inorganic form, I mean a form of fluoride that has to be made in a lab. It's not something that naturally occurs. And so the fluoride that was being added intentionally, that is a natural form of fluoride that it just exists in nature. However, this inorganic form is something that just it can't naturally form based on its chemical structure. And so the scientists say, how strange that this man-made product is being added into the water, or is in the water, and it's in people's blood. What's happening here? And so they begin doing some investigation, and some point it does end up back to DuPont again. And DuPont says, oh, this is the same formula as the chemicals we're putting in our Teflon pans. And so they get nervous. And so they begin to test the blood of the people working in their factories. And turns out the blood levels had 1,000 times that of people who were not working in these factories. And so DuPont has to make a decision. They can either own up to the chemicals that they're producing in their products that they're making millions and millions of dollars off of, and say, hey, these are actually getting into the environment, we don't know how they're impacting people's health, or they can double down and say nothing. And naturally, they double down. So DuPont begins running some tests in the 60s and finds that it definitely is having negative impacts on people's health, or not on people's health, excuse me, but on monkeys and rats that they're running these tests on. And so, as far as back as the 60s, they realize this could be a problem. And then they continue to do nothing. And so the 60s go by, the 70s go by. In the 80s, they begin doing more in-depth testing on these PFAS chemicals and are still finding very negative results, continue to do nothing. The 90s go by, and it isn't until the end of the 90s when a farmer sells off some of his land to the DuPont Chemical Company in the Ohio-West Virginia border right on the river, the Ohio River. And so, as time goes on, his cattle begin to die off, and they're dying off of strange ailments. There's a slaver that's running down their face that they've never had, the teeth are going black, the hair's coming off the body. The photos are quite horrendous, but this farmer says this isn't normal, what's going on? And he finds that there is a pipe onto the land that he sold that is right upstream of where all of his cattle are drinking water. And so, although the water was on his property, DuPont was dumping onto theirs, but as things flow downstream, it was ending up in his water source, and the cattle were getting sick from drinking out of this pipe. So he decides that he's going to sue the DuPont company. And it is a bit of a long battle, but he does win the lawsuit. Unfortunately, him and his wife do both pass away of cancer in the following years. It is quite possible that these cancers were linked to the being downstream of this chemical factory. However, that's still slightly inconclusive. Now, there's another lawsuit that happens as well, right? Same area. However, it's 3,500 people get together for a class action lawsuit, and this lawsuit takes somewhere around 10 to 12 years. However, 70,000 people had their blood tested, and it is what is known as now as the largest scientific health experiment ever to be conducted. And in this experiment, they were looking at PFOA, which is one of the thousands of chemical compounds that related to PFAS. And what they found was that there is definitely association with PFOA and an assortment of different health effects. And I'll talk about those in a little bit, but I kind of talked a little bit about the story here, and so everyone that won that lawsuit, they now have the right to sue DuPont for any type of health issues they may have related to these chemicals, and all of their chemical or their health bills will be paid for by DuPont. I leave these documentaries up on the board right now. Dark Waters is a Hollywood dramatization with Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway about the first lawsuit that I mentioned. The Devil We Know is a ProPublica documentary. It is a lot more realistic, factual than Dark Waters, but it is done really well, and it will pull at your heartstrings. It follows a family, a woman who was working in the DuPont factory years ago, her child, the health defects he had growing up, how it was to be a child, having gone through all that. It really will make you tear up. And the third one I added is a little bit of a shift. A lot of it, the other two are looking at the Ohio, West Virginia area. This one is how the carpet industry has been polluting in Georgia and into local waterways. So just to say, these chemicals are widespread. They are everywhere. We have been finding them here in Connecticut as well. And that's not to say that they're going to be everywhere in Connecticut. Areas we have been testing have had a history of large industry and dumping. So it's not unexpected that we found what we have found, but we are here to test the whole state and get a better understanding of what it looks like. So let's talk a little bit about PFAS now, what we do know, and then we'll start talking about health impacts. So PFAS are most likely everywhere around you, everywhere in your home. You look at this diagram, you could see things like floss, toilet paper, nail polish, makeups, carpets, furniture in your house, guitar strings, pizza boxes, candy wrappers. All these things that seem to be just kind of ubiquitous, things that are just happen to be around the house, have PFAS treated on them in some way, shape, or form. So they are kind of everywhere. That's not to say that they're, coming off all of these products and entering into your body. Absolutely not. But they are there, and there may be trace amounts that are getting into your system, right? For things like carpets and furniture, the tiny little fibers that are sprayed with PFAS eventually do come off the upholstery and end up floating around into the air as just fabrics. And these chemically treated fabrics, we may or may not be breathing in at a certain time, and therefore entering into your system. So it's estimated that around 98% of Americans have some trace amount of PFAS in their blood. That is not to say that they have a amount that's going to relate to any type of health impact, but it's there. It's somewhere. It's estimated a similar number on all humans globally. These chemicals are just widespread and dispersed and have been for almost 80 years. 73 million people are being exposed to PFAS from their public drinking water. And I raise this point because there is limited numbers in research on well water and private water. However, it has been found that where public water is contaminated, it's most likely that private water is also contaminated in the same area. So we're looking at roughly similar numbers for public water drinkers and private water drinkers and their exposure counts to PFAS chemicals. Now, when we're talking about exposure, and we do talk about it a lot in this presentation, exposure does not mean causation, right? An association is that there's a higher likelihood that these chemicals may be impacting your health, right? You could be exposed at high levels well into your 90s and have never had a health implication, and it could be the opposite. You could be just exposed a little bit and just had some really bad odds, bad chances, and maybe something happens. But with these chemicals, they build up over time, right? So being exposed one time, even if it's a high amount, it does not mean you're going to develop a health implication. That, again, I'm talking about in a second. But as these build up in the body, it takes a very long time for them to leave. Most recent study I've seen was that it could be anywhere between 3 and 15 years before they actually clear out of the system. And different bodies do different things, so it is kind of variable. But these chemicals will last for a while. And so when we're talking about, risk, we're not talking about just, showering in it and it touching your skin and that being a problem. They're not caustic, they're not being absorbed to the skin. The main form of ingestion, the main form of exposure is ingestion. So drinking or eating, getting these products from the foods and the waters we're drinking. So when we're talking about the health impacts, we're talking about either vaccines are not working as properly as they should be, a handful of different thyroid issues. They do kind of get trapped in thyroid and cause a variety of things there. Cholesterol and hypertension are known to be associated with these chemicals, liver damage, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, and all sorts of reproductive and developmental issues. Now, the majority of the chemicals we've done research on are PFOA. There has been also done research on PFOS, and Gen X is the next big one, but there are thousands of these chemicals, and it's very debated on even how many there are. So the research is still new. We don't know if all of these chemicals will impact the human body the same way that PFOA has, but for right now, it's a safe guideline to follow until we know more. And if you're concerned and you're saying, well, maybe I've been exposed for years and we find it, in your water, we recommend that you go to your primary care provider. They can do a blood test to see how much is in your system, how much is just floating around in there, and can give you guidance on what to do about that. Now, when they are in your system, I will say it is very hard to get it out without like a blood transfusion or something along those lines. And it does seem like health insurance will not be covering the majority of treatment from current people I've been speaking to. So instead of worrying about what may be already in your system, the best way is to reduce further exposures. So like I mentioned, ingestion is the main pathway of PFAS into the body. So knowing what waters you're drinking, which if you are listening to this presentation, it's most likely that you are concerned and looking to get your water tested. Non-stick pans, we get a lot of questions about these. If you are using a non-stick pan, it's not the end of the world. If you look at the pan, you see that there's no chips, no scratches. It looks, good as the day you bought it. it's most likely fine. The problem is when you start seeing those chips is a sign that the adhesive bonds, the chemicals that are binding the PFAS spray to the pan itself, are beginning to break down. Those tend to happen when we're cooking at high temperatures using these things, and like oils, cooking oils at high temperatures. They begin to break down both the chemical adhesive bonds as well as the PFAS themselves, right? I mentioned that they do break down under certain conditions, and incredibly high temperatures is one of them. Other things to avoid is grease-resistant packaging. You know, fast food, it's convenient, it's great, but those like the wrapping that's holding a cheeseburger from a Burger King or a Five Guys, that paper is most likely treated with PFAS. And the hot grease that's leaking out of that burger, similar to the pan, may be hot enough to begin breaking down the adhesive bonds that are holding the PFAS to that paper. So, just something to note. As of July 1st, 2026, the state of Connecticut has mandated that any products that have PFAS in them should be labeled, and anything that does not have PFAS in them should also be labeled as no PFAS or PFAS free. Now, this is a new regulation and may still be rolling out at the time of recording, but there is legislation being put out by the state of Connecticut to begin banning PFAS products, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So, on a national scale, there are 6 PFAS compounds that are being monitored and regulated within public water drinking systems. Now, I'll back up and say if you have a well, you're on a private drinking system. And because the EPA does not monitor or give regulation for private systems, since it is the homeowner's discretion what they want to do with their private system, we use the public drinking water standards for private drinking water. So this means if there is a new regulation that comes out around public drinking water, we use that as a recommendation and a guideline for private drinking water. And so on a national scale, if public water is tested and PFAS are found in them, anyone in that district is going to be notified to say that there is something in their water. Treatment is going to be required. There are guidelines on here as to when the treatment will be required for that facility, but it is within like 2 to 3 years after it's been tested. These laws are a little flexible at this moment and possibly changing. But in the state of Connecticut, we are also adopting these rules. So if they do change on a national scale, the state of Connecticut will also require our water treatment companies to be testing to ensure public health. Now, on another state law was an act concerning the use of PFAS in certain products. Now, this act was just a phasing out of intentionally added PFAS products over the next few years. Now, when I say that, I mean things that like a waterproof jacket, a Teflon pan, a Tupperware, these things that are made to be water or oil resistant, these are things that have intentionally added PFAS in them. Things that like recycled materials, like recycled pencils or recycled papers, these things may have PFAS in them, but they'll be in such trace amounts that they're not being intentionally screened and banned, because it would have been a lot more work, and recycling is hard enough as it is. So as of January 1st, 2028, intentionally added PFAS will not be allowed in any products sold within the state. There may be some regulation issues when bringing things over through Amazon or shipping, but be reassured that anything you find on the shelf will not have PFAS in it by 2028. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about wells. So in this diagram, I have everything you really need to know about what's happening with a well. So as rain is coming down from the sky, it does not just pool on the ground at your feet. It's constantly sinking into the ground. And as rain is sinking into the ground, it is also pulling anything from the surface down with it. So let's say there is some type of industrial dumping and PFAS are ending up on this property. As rain comes down from the sky and pushes the chemicals that are being dumped out into this property into the ground, it's going to pull it into what's called the water table. Now, the water table is everything below in the bluish brown area at the bottom of the page. That water table is just the area at which the water is sinking through the soil and stops. It becomes so saturated with water that it can't sink any further, and it's just this, space at which is filled with soil and water. If you have a dug well or a shallow well, this is most likely where your water is coming from. So a dug well is just a space that's carved into the water table. The stones are keeping the dirt from pushing through, and the water is being pulled directly out there. Now, if you have a drilled well, your water is coming from a little further underground. Now, the reason that the water pools on the soil level, and stops moving is because underneath all the soil is one solid piece of stone. Now, that solid stone has small cracks and fractures in it, and water is able to travel through those cracks and fractures. Now, water's been traveling through for hundreds of thousands of years and has created small channels all throughout this massive piece of stone. And a drilled well cuts through that stone, and as it's cutting through small fractures, small cracks and whatnot. So water is just flowing through as its path that it's been traveling for hundreds of thousands of years has been disrupted. It's now falling directly into this hole and filling up the well at the bottom of the pit. So a pump is then dropped down into this newly dug well, a casing is putting around it, and that water is sitting at the bottom. So if you have PFAS being dumped onto this property, it could be traveling through the water table into the ground well. It could be continuing further down into the bedrock. And if it is, it's then being pumped up into the home. Now, just because these chemicals may last forever doesn't mean that they can't be treated out of your water. So there are two main treatment options we're going to highlight within this program. One is a reverse osmosis machine. Reverse osmosis uses a thin membrane that the pores are so small that almost the only thing that can get through is just pure water. Now with these machines, there is a bit of a waste, so for every 1 gallon of drinkable water, 3 to 4 end up being dumped out back down your drain. However, this is the most effective way of getting anything out of your water. And then it will then put healthy minerals and nutrients back into your water just in case. Because, fun fact, straight H2O will dehydrate you. Now, granular activated carbon is the other type of system. Now, these come in a range of different devices. They could be under your sink, like this circled device is here in the photo. It could sit on your counter as a pitcher, and it could treat the entire home. And we'll be offering all three of those options within this program, and for the RO machine, we are only offering a on-the-counter pitcher option. So for the Let's Talk PFAS program, let's talk about getting your wells tested. So if you are interested in testing with us, for this current iteration of the program, we are hosting it in Windham, Mansfield, and Chaplin. Now, all these towns have qualified, and certain towns around the state will be qualified, and if not, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information will be at the end, and we may be able to provide you an alternative option if your town is not qualifying for the free treatment systems. But if it does, we will be offering test kits at a location somewhere local, preferably a town hall or a UConn Extension office, and we will have kits there. You'll be able to pick them up, sign up, and then return the kit either back to the same office or to a different UConn building. We try to stagger out the kit distribution as not to overwhelm the testing labs that we're using. They can handle around 20 a week, but if there is a huge influx of people, we are able to provide additional testing services through different labs. So if you have received a kit, it's going to look something like this. It'll be a large kit. There'll be 5 bottles inside, plastic gloves, a pen, and then you will also receive a couple of sheets of paper that will have instructions and a chain of custody form. The instructions, I know, are a bit dense. However, if you take the time to read every single one, you'll see that everything is blocked out by certain steps, and in those steps you have your sub-steps, and if you just follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and just go down the list, your results should be as accurate as possible. Now, if you have any issues when you're doing these tests, my number is located right at the end. So feel free to give me a call before you start if you have any questions in the middle. Happy to talk you through it, but in the meantime, I'll walk you through what you're going to need to do right now. So it's going to come with one set of nitrile gloves. Obviously, just put the gloves on and keep them on for the duration of your testing process. You're then going to take 3 bottles. In that kit, there'll be 3 bottles at the bottom of the bag and then 2 bottles in a different bag inside of the bag as a whole. Leave those 2 bottles for now, put those off to the side, and just take out these 3 sample bottles. With these 3 empty sample bottles, you will take them, take the cap off, fill it up with water, put the cap back on, put it back in the bag, and repeat with bottles 2 and 3. Now, this is the part that tends to confuse people a little bit. There's these 2 bottles, which are the field blanks. Now, one will have water in it and one will not have water in it. If you take the bottle that is filled with water, you pour it into the empty bottle, you put the cap back on the empty bottle, you should be all set. And if you're wondering, what did that do? Excellent question. These bottles are what we're using as a control. So we're just making sure that if there was a chance that, let's say you forgot to put your gloves on and you had some type of cream on your hand that had PFAS in it, this would just let us know that there was some type of outside contamination source, and we would have to ask you to redo the test. We've had very few people have any type of issue, but we did find that one of our participants filled one of these bottles from the tap and gave us an inaccurate count at how many parts per trillion these chemicals were in their water. So it's just a good way to make sure that we are doing our job and your results are as accurate as possible. So again, with the 2 field blanks, they'll be labeled FLB, FRB, BLK, something like that. Take the full one, pour it in the empty one, put them back in their green bag, call it a day. There will also be labels provided in your kits. You take those labels, just put the date and the time. Everything else should be labeled with the proper numbers, and you can just put those back on your bottles. And those will go on these 3 sample bottles. Your field blank bottle will already be labeled, so no need to worry about that. So you can take these 3, put them on those 3 bottles, call it a day. Finally, there will be the chain of custody form. This form, anything that is highlighted in yellow will need to be filled out. This is stuff you should know, like date, your name, your address, your email, your phone number. The only thing that may need to be from us would be the sample ID, which will be labeled on all of these labels as well as the field blank bottle. So take that, put it in the sample ID column, and you should be all set. Now, I know I'm talking a lot, and everything I'm saying here is in the instructions, so no need to try to memorize what's going on. Once you have your instructions, you'll know what to do. Finally, in the kit, there will be a reminder. This reminder just tells you where you will be dropping off your kit and the dates, 2 dates that week, and what time. Some drop-off times may be different. Some may be 9 to 4, some may be 5 to 7. It will all depend on the area that we're doing our testing in. So for dropping off the kit, for this example, we were using the Radcliffe Hicks building on Mondays and Wednesdays. This is a photo of what it would look like for dropping off, and we do make sure to be as accommodating as possible, so if there are any type of scheduling issues, we are pretty good at accommodating those. So once the kits are dropped off, it takes 2 to 3 weeks or so before results get back to us. Once the results get back, we'll give you 2 different results sheets. One will look like this, and on here there will only be 6 compounds. These 6 compounds are what the EPA has regulations for. So the other sheet you'll receive will have around 20 to 30 different compounds. Now, those are everything that the testing method can look at. However, some of those do not have standards, health standards associated with them. So when looking at this result, you'll have this, and before I talk about reading what it actually means, let's talk about what these are being measured in. And so there was some questions at the last event about how many Olympic-sized swimming pool 1 part per trillion is, and we did the numbers out recently, and a single drop of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a single drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools is 1 part per trillion. So, right, if you dip your finger into one of these pools and you see a single drop comes off, it would take 20 full pools to be the equivalent of 1 part per trillion. So these things are small. These things are incredibly small. And again, if you're being exposed to, 100 or so of these at a time, well, maybe not the biggest issue. If you're being regularly exposed for long periods, years and years, that's when they start to bioaccumulate in the body because they don't flush out of the body. And so the more you have, the more likely there is something to go wrong. So when you get your results, you'll see something like this. The first column will be the compound that we are testing for, the regulated compound. The second column will be your result. So in this one, it was 5 parts per trillion for PFOA. And if you look to the far end, you'll see that the EPA standard is 4 parts per trillion. So when we generate these reports, it'll automatically highlight anything that is not within the EPA standards as in red, so bright red no. And when you get that bright red no, that will signal to us that you will be eligible for treatment. So if you are eligible for treatment, you will be offered either a point of use system or a point of entry system. Point of use system will be like these 2 top examples. Something that may go directly underneath your sink or sit on top of your kitchen counter or in the fridge. Or the point of entry system, which will go into the basement, attached to wherever your full water system is. It could be a crawl space, could be the basement, could be the garage. All of these options will treat water to the same efficacy. So they're all as efficient as one another. Some people opt for the full house system because they have, multiple kitchens or multiple sinks that they're either drinking out of. Or they have young children in the house who may be prone to drinking out of water from the sinks in the bathrooms. We are definitely having a mix of people choosing both options, so it's whatever's right for you. If you do find that you do have PFAS in your water, we will hand out a brochure with all of our options for treatment with the details in all 3 of these different situations. And I will also be available to answer any questions, as well as Frank and our team from Department of Public Health. So we will assist you and accommodate you with whatever you need to know about these. Final point I should make about these is that if you do qualify for the program, you do qualify for treatment. Treatment, it will be entirely free. However, after a year, you will need to replace the filters within these systems, and those costs will then be up to the homeowner, and the yearly maintenance going forward will be responsibility of the homeowner. So that is all the information I have on these compounds. In summary, they are an industrial made chemical that is being found all over the country, all over the world. Now, there are long-term health effects that are being found, and we are still finding more and more every day. But to that point, they can be reduced from your drinking water. You can reduce your exposure. So I don't want anyone to walk away from this presentation feeling more panicked about learning about something that could be potentially dangerous to their health, because at the end of the day, it is something that we will be able to treat and remediate. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email at alec.janis@uconn.edu. For health-related questions, I've left a link for the Department of Public Health Emerging Contaminants Unit for anything related to the environment, environmental dumping, environmental sources of pollution. That DEEP can help you out. And for physicians, that link right there is a great resource for anyone who works in the medical field and would like to know more about talking to the patients about these types of chemicals. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.